Hello, everyone. So to think about, understand how conservation is done when you focus on a population, which is what oftentimes you do focus on when you actually go do the physical work of conservation, is a population, not the whole species or biodiversity or even an ecosystem. Oftentimes it comes down to a particular species. Do this, we're going to focus on the red-cockaded woodpecker. And I chose this as an example because it's something we can relate to. We don't have red-cockaded woodpeckers here. They're not native here. They're a highly endangered species that is native to the southeastern United States, and they live in pine forest, but not just any pine forest. It's got to be a pine forest that's fairly open. It's called a savanna, where you have trees and grasses sort of scattered around. The southeast United States, of course, is highly developed and impacted, and of course, forest deforestation happened there just like it happened here. And so, but there are red-cockaded woodpeckers left, and this is actually a conservation success story so far. And I think it's going to be, I think they're probably going to be okay. And it's a really kind of an uplifting story. But what it really is important is that this system, by learning the system, really delving into it, you really understand the realities of conservation biology when it's focused on the level of populations, including having to do modeling as well. I say we can relate to it because it's a forest dwelling species of woodpecker. We do not, we have many species of woodpeckers here. So here's the bird here. It's about the size of your, a little shorter than your hand. A woodpecker, if you know your woodpeckers around here, it's about the size of a hairy woodpecker, which is really common over here. But the reason it's uncommon is because it's very picky in its habitat preferences. And so it just won't nest unless it has certain conditions. So it's got, as far as how hard is this species to conserve, it's pretty difficult to conserve. But there's a few things about it which make it a little easier to conserve, as you'll see. It's a funny species. The things that have to be done with it are kind of interesting, to say the least. So just to introduce this topic, I want to say also is if you go to Brightspace, the course page here, there are readings associated with this. But I want to remind everybody, it's very rare when you actually have to read a whole article. Okay, and here scientific articles are difficult to read, and nobody really wants to read the whole thing unless you have to. But here's readings under populations, readings, articles, videos. I have them all under one category here. So if you click on that, there's the different categories here. There's measuring abundance using indices, rare species, population viability analysis, and minimum viable population, metapopulations dispersal, population genetics, and explanatory videos. So if you go to, for example, metapopulations and dispersal, here are the articles here. Notice I've written in here, typed in how much of the article you need to read. Most of the time it's abstract only, or abstract and part of the introduction, or a figure. Very rare, in this case here, read the whole article, but very rarely. Here's another one, you read the whole article, but usually that's a short article. And even when I ask you to read the whole article, it doesn't mean that you'll get to a part where there's some difficult, some kind of tedious methods. You can skim past that part. Usually methods are not as important. I don't expect you to come out with internalized what was done at a specific level. So let's just introduce ourselves here to the species. Here it is here. What you notice here in this picture is that it kind of illustrates some things. One thing is, here's this picture here that illustrates the loss of forest, like what happened here. So the southeast United States, these are longleaf and shortleaf pine forest, loblolly pine, and these forests were logged. Very, very important wood. Pine is a soft wood, so it's pretty easy to work and make lots and lots of wood products out of it that go into it. It's a really nice nice wood. It's called these are soft woods. These are conifers, pines. I think I just saw a bird just fly into the house I'm in here. I'll deal with that later. So So here we are here. And then this other picture here shows the woodpecker on a pine tree. Now around here with eastern white pines, our most common pine, you'll see this resin. It's not sap, by the way. Sap is transparent, is not sticky. Resin is not. So this is resin. So these pines down here are really highly resinous. So when they get a tree that's injured, a pine tree, it exudes resin. And then the resin drips down the tree. Eventually, by the way, this resin, this is where amber comes from. So insects get trapped in that. They die. They get trapped. The resin falls on the ground. And then and then it fossilizes maybe over time. And anyway, but the resin is actually really important because the resin is it's sticky, and there's species that like snakes don't like it, just like we don't like it if you get resin in your hands. So the tree actually, once it's the birds actually need this resin. It helps keep predators off the tree. So just look at some videos here showing just kind of the type of habitat they're in. There you see a bunch of public participation volunteers there. And what you're seeing here is two things. One thing is the type of habitat they're in. The second thing is the highly manipulative nature of the conservation. So they've literally gone in to try to boost the population. They've made artificial nests because otherwise a woodpecker has to make its own nest. You might say, you're a woodpecker, make your own nest. What's the big deal? Well, here is a big deal. And there are no videos I know of a red-cockaded woodpecker making a nest. So I just took one here of a different species, a pileated woodpecker making its nest. So here it is here. Now, I just want you to see the process involved. And that definitely is a bird in my house, by the way, in making a nest. This is all sped up. So a woodpecker drills a hole through the outer layers of bark and cambium and into the heartwood of the tree, which is really hard. However, it's a lot easier if the heartwood of that tree is already been softened by a fungus. The inner part of a tree is dead anyway. It's like your hair or your fingernails. It's not living material, but it's very important for structure. Fungi get in there and eat that. Doesn't bother the tree at all. It's dead material anyway, but it softens the wood. Woodpeckers like that. So I think this woodpecker got in here, and actually the wood is soft. So you could actually scrape it with your fingernail once you got inside and just dig it out yourself. And there's all the wood on the ground. This is a different species of woodpecker. But red-cockaded do the same thing. That's how they make their nest. So to speed up the process, they drill these holes. And I've been part of projects before where you take chainsaws and you angle them, you take them and cut at different angles. It's really dangerous work. But anyway, they did that here, and they make these little cassettes. So they cut a hole in the tree. Doesn't hurt the tree at all. It's like a little cassette. And then you can go in, and the great thing is they can go in and they can do highly manipulative work where they actually, for example, as we'll see here, they have to pull flying squirrels out of these nest holes. Flying squirrels go in and exclude they'll take over the home with the red-cockaded woodpeckers in it, so it can't nest there. They also other squirrels will get in and ruin the nest or chase off all of the birds. Or sometimes they'll go in and if there's an area where there's a lot of red-cockaded woodpeckers, they'll go in and they'll take their nestlings, and go transfer, and raise them in captivity or transfer the birds somewhere else. Or sometimes they'll actually fumigate the young because they get bed bugs just to help them survive a little better. It's all artificial, very, very intrusive work, very unnatural. And you can ask the question, to what extent have we actually saved the species if this is what it takes to keep the population going? This is a catch and release type thing here. They put, this is cases where they were, I guess they covered the nest up. Now they're going to pull it off. Now the birds are free to go. You get the idea. Very highly manipulative type of work. This is the habitat they live in. Another thing you have to do is you have to go in, since we don't allow fires to burn across landscapes anymore. New England, at one time, New England actually burned well, for one thing, Native Americans burned it during the summer. And so now we have this unnatural landscape all over the United States, eastern United States, where trees come in and they're trees that wouldn't be there if it weren't for fire. So they go in and they burn. So this area here has been kept relatively open by burning. The trees are kind of spaced out at different intervals. If you go down to Florida, like the Ocala National Forest, you'll see where it's been intentionally burned, kept open with grasses in between. This is really important. There's a nestling they actually took out of a nest. They banned them because they need to know where they go, how far they go. Are they actually doing what you think your conservation efforts are doing? Is the population growing? Are they dispersing and going, making new colonies? Well, how do you know if you don't catch an individual and put radio collars or GPS backpacks on it, banding them? I don't know if it was going to show a fire. Anyway, the problem is, of course, when you go in and do fire burning, then that's you have to bring out the fire department to be posted there, which means you have to really pay them to make sure the fire doesn't get away from you. You got to do it when it's not too dry, which means it's not going to burn very well. So it's a very challenging type of thing to do. Here's the area here. Just take a look at one example of the area. If you zoom out here, there's Florida, Georgia. Look at Georgia right here. So there's Atlanta. Let me just get rid of the roads here because that kind of. There's Atlanta, northern Georgia, up on the border of Tennessee, and in North Carolina. You have the greater sort of tentacles of Atlanta spread out. This is all highly fragmented, getting worse, really. All these towns here, and then you go down to the southern part. Look at the there's any area you see it's not green is been highly is developed. Town after town after town after town. Georgia's an old colony in the United States. You zoom in, what do you see? The familiar landscape of agriculture. These are pivoted irrigation systems that turn in a circle. They're growing everything you can imagine down there. You name it. Just name any crop. It's grown down there. Cotton, tobacco, and all the standard crops. Sometimes these are there's also pecan trees and things like that. Anyway, but there's here we have a reserve. And oftentimes they're along river channels, like this one here. Here's the Ishaway Reserve. And if you zoom in here, it doesn't look like anything special, but this is special because this is a savanna pine forest. So these pine trees here were not logged anytime recently. They're allowed to grow, but at the same time, fire is allowed to move throughout landscapes. Or no, it's not allowed to. It's intentionally burned and kept natural, which would have happened long ago. Fires just burned, and now we don't let them burn anymore. You'll see why the woodpecker needs that. This is just one example here. This is the Jones Center. It's a conservation group that bought land, and it's conserved for the red-cockaded woodpecker. This is the but you don't want to see here on this graph here. You don't want to see. You want to see blue. There's an increase in populations, not decrease. So they bring fire in. It burns it oftentimes during the winter or spring, and then in the summer, grasses come back in. What you don't want are having a bunch of shrubs growing up around the base of the trees, because snakes crawl up any of these trees. These are the black rat snake like we have here, and there's a couple other species down there, but especially the black rat snake. They are perfectly nice snakes, but they are really deadly to red-cockaded woodpeckers. They eat everything. These will eat any bird, any nest. But when your population is already low, having snakes around is a problem. So what they do, the snakes actually usually don't target trees that are kind of out in the open. So the snakes prefer shrubby stuff right up next to it. If you have fires, the fires sort of keep away all that brush. So the red-cockaded, so I think I have this. You can see the snake. This is the same species of rat snake. They're harmless to us. I mean, they'll maybe give you a little bite, but they're not venomous at all. This ad here is over where we'll see the snakes. You go out here to the Here we go here. This is a pileated woodpecker confronting a black rat snake. Somewhere here. Oh, actually, it's over here at 4. So the snake's up in the tree there. Oops, I'm not sure what happened. There's the. Again, this is not a red-cockaded, but same thing. So these woodpeckers have to fight a battle against snakes. There's a snake right there. Kind of creepy, isn't it? Actually, black rat snakes, you could grab that snake. It's not going to actually hurt you. But it does. They do eat birds. So the trees. Another thing about the trees is they have to be of a certain size that's big enough for the birds to be able to get a good cavity inside and to be able to nest in there. So you got to let the trees grow, not cut them down, and they got to get old enough also to develop this heart rot fungus. I'm not saying like a bad thing. It's actually a good thing for the woodpeckers, and it doesn't really hurt the tree much at all. It's just trees, as they get older, they get more fungi, but it doesn't necessarily hurt it. Trees usually die with it and not of it. And it softens the heartwood in this, so allows the woodpecker to get in there and scrape the wood out more easily. Otherwise, even though it's really hard wood. Is over time, what happens is if you get undergrowth growing as the trees, well, it's just no good for red-cockaded woodpeckers. Woodpeckers are not going to go fly around and choose a tree that's got a bunch of brush around it. So what they also don't like and will not tolerate are plantations. So this is most of the wood you buy at Home Depot comes from trees that have been grown like this, straight rows, herbicides, pesticides applied, and no other diversity at all. It's kind of like a row of corn, basically, and they grow for about 40 years. The Southeast United States trees grow really, really fast. They get plenty of water usually, and then they can grow lumber really fast. So logging, unfortunately, replaces forest with plantations. So the trees never get to be over 70 years old, and these trees need to be over. So red-cockaded woodpecker, when it flies into a forest, it needs to have a few trees that are really old, and that's a natural forest. Not that all of the trees are old, but they need a few trees that are old. So they go in and choose. Well, they don't usually let the forestry, Georgia Pacific, Weyerhaeuser, they don't let trees grow to 70 because by then the inner part of the wood is starting to rot, and that's no good for lumber. So this is what you do. You do this kind of intensive management like we just saw there, including handling the birds and tracking them, and this is what's been done. These are some of the nest box cassettes that are used. Look at here, trees have been marked and are tagged. So these here, they basically, if you conserve forest for red-cockaded woodpeckers, you got to let the trees grow. You got to burn it regularly. Get the population up high enough that it can eventually now sustain itself. Because populations need to get, if they're too small, they can't sustain themselves. If they're too small, then it's just a matter of time before something comes in like a hurricane and wipes out half the population. If you have a population of only 20 and a hurricane wipes out 10 of the nests, then you've lost half your population. If you have a population of say 1,000 and you lose half, well, you still have 500 left, which is, so population size matters. Here's what I said about red-cockaded woodpeckers being a species which is actually, on the flip side, is actually fairly easy to work with because they will take they will readily accept artificial nests. And actually, they don't even seem to mind that much being manipulated, Like, for example, here's another. So flying squirrels get in these nests. So here's what they have to do. Go in and with this vacuum cleaner thing and suck out the flying squirrels. And they take them and they, humanely release them somewhere else. I don't know how good that does. But here's the live flying squirrels they've taken out. They had to vacuum them out. There they are. By the way, there's plenty of southern flying squirrels around here. You just don't see them. They're nocturnal. But they, and then that nest hole now is available for red-cockaded woodpecker. Will they actually use it? Sure, they'll use it. So the birds are actually quite flexible and tolerant, which is really nice. There's other birds that will just not use anything that's not natural. You're probably, I hope you're also thinking like, well, have we really conserved the species? If this is what we have to do? So here's another thing about them is they have territories. So it's made up of breeding territories. And when you think of territory, you oftentimes think of a dominant individual that excludes everybody else, or a pack of wolves that excludes all the other wolves in that area. It's not really like that, but here's what it is like. So if you zoom in here and look at these trees, and if there are, and I don't remember how many woodpeckers there are in this area here, but if say there might be 2 breeding groups, clusters, territories, they're referred to in different ways here. So what it is you would have, one area here might be sort of claimed by a family group. I'm just making this up. This area here might be claimed by a family group. And so in this cluster here of trees, you might have several nests, red-cockaded woodpeckers. They all know each other. They're closely related to each other, uncles and aunts and kids and grandkids. But here's the thing, they actually do exclude others from outside the group. And then over here, you might have another cluster over here. And this is about the size of their clusters usually, as they make clusters kind of like this. And it might kind of extend a little bit into the other one here, and it might be smaller, it might be long. They have different shapes. And the birds recognize these things. So there might be another territory right here. So these are called, let's call them territories, different territories. And within those, and the birds know when they're in their territory, and they know when a bird from outside the territory comes in. So they are territorial against other territories, but within this, these are related groups. You might call them friends and relatives that all know each other. They're kind of like a tribe. And the tribe recognizes each other, and they stick with each other. Sometimes, of course, now these have to start from somewhere, right? So individuals will leave and fly off and start a new colony if they have the right tree. But the problem is, if you go out in the Georgia countryside, you're not going to find the right tree, the right conditions. So that's one thing about them. They're these territories. The other thing is when there's actually a nest, a red-cockaded woodpecker nest, you would see mom and dad coming and feeding the young. Mom, dad sitting on the eggs at night before they hatch. And if you were to watch really carefully, you'd see there sometimes a third individual adult will show up, or fourth individual. Like, wait a minute, that's not mom or dad. Who is that? Turns out that the kids from previous nests, if they haven't gotten to mate, they'll help out their parents raising the young. So they have helpers at the nest. So they have cooperative breeding, helpers at the nest. And then so if you're a red-cockaded woodpecker and you don't get to nest, say for example you're here, you were born in this territory, but you can't find you weren't able to mate yourself or make your own nest, you can leave and go try to find your own area to start, or you can stay and just sort of float around and wait for an opportunity, or you can help your parents. And they do all those things. Sometimes they'll wait for a female or a male will wait for his dad to die, and then he'll, because dad will kind of exclude, sometimes sort of bully the other male, the sons there. You'll wait for him to die, and then he'll take over a nest. And by then, you hope it's a different female, not the mom. So the result of all this is really nice, is that when there's a nest, one of the things about conserving birds is if you lose one of the parents, the other parent has to do all the taking care of the nest. And oftentimes it doesn't work. It takes 2 to raise young. But it doesn't matter in red-cockaded woodpeckers. If one of the individual, like male or mom or dad gets killed, there's plenty of other helpers of the nest. So in other words, the young have high survival. They get taken care of by a village. That's nice. The problem with this is, on the other side, is means that how do you colonize? So imagine that by some miracle, you set aside big. Here's one here. You were able to create a lot of red-cockaded woodpecker habitat through conservation efforts. How did the birds get from? It's not like the birds 200 miles away know that you created habitat somewhere else. How do they know? They don't know. You got to either physically take them there or hope they get there. Well, I guess what I'm getting at here is that the birds tend to stay at home. People live in small towns, way off in rural America. A lot of people just stay right there in tiny little towns and they never leave. And that's kind of like the red-cockaded woodpeckers. Like some leave, but most don't. So it makes it very hard to recolonize new areas. So that's the bad side. What you really need for a population to survive and to grow is dispersers. So young individuals that leave, go start new population. So populations are made up of breeding territories. And if one parent's lost, another one can step in. So that helps. And we have very low populations right now. And so a place like Issawa, they want you to have a goal. They might want to have a goal of 40 adults there eventually. So they keep for that to happen, requires the best way to grow a population is to have the kids go off and reproduce, and the grandkids reproduce, and the great-grandkids reproduce. That doesn't happen in red-cockaded woodpeckers. Instead, what happens is mom, dad reproduce. The kids hang on for just kind of don't really do anything for a couple of years except help out at the nest. And they don't go forth and multiply, not very often. So that's a slow growing population. So high survival of young, but not a lot of grandchildren produced very fast. So we have a species that grows slowly. So you have all over the entire United States, you just have a few thousand scattered territories, mostly on these little public land patches like the Jones Center here in Texas. There's some in Oklahoma. I've only seen one red-cockaded woodpecker a long time ago. But there's a lot of them out there, but they're all scattered. So the question is, how do you find each other? If the population is going to be a real population, they need to be a functioning population that's out moving over the landscape and not just a bunch of little isolated patches that you're having to constantly maintain, sucking flying squirrels out of the nest. They put baffles around trees to keep the snakes from going up. You're continually having to modify the habitat. And then, this is another bad thing is when hurricanes come in and they can go in, when a hurricane hits a particular area, I'm sure some got wiped out by Hurricane Ian in Florida recently. Your whole reserve system all those trees may get knocked down, or half of them. So I'm going to stop this video here at this point because now we've set the context. I hope you have a good feel for the natural history and breeding characteristics of the species. It's easy to work with in some ways, hard to work with in others. Slowly growing population, which is not good. You're trying because you have a small population, you want it to grow more rapidly, and it takes lots and lots of hands-on management to make it happen. I'm going to stop this video. I'm going to go capture that Carolina wren that's in my wife's office in the house. And in the next video, we'll actually take a look at some of the modeling that's been done with this system.